Welcome to VINTed with Scout Driscoll. Come along with me on my journey into the wine world, where I share thoughtful conversations with wine industry leaders. Get ready for marketing insights from branding and design to sales and social media, and the answer to the ultimate question: what moves wine? Hi everyone, I'm Scout Driscoll, founder of Vint Studio and host of VINTed, where I ask top leaders in the wine industry, how do you move wine? Past episodes include conversations on sustainability in wine with Marion Leitner from Archer Roos, and all about PR and communications with Taylor Foxman, founder of the Industry Collective. On today's episode, I'll be talking to the one and only Rob McMillan from Silicon Valley Bank. But before we get started, here's a quick note from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Vint Wine Branding and Design, where rich storytelling meets smart design. At Vint, our studio goes beyond the label, guiding wine brands through strategy-rich branding and packaging evolution. Our work with Cooper's Hawk has helped them grow the nation's largest wine club with over 500,000 members. You can learn more at vint.studio, and for a free label audit for your brand, just email me at hello@vint.studio. To most people in the wine industry, today's guest needs no introduction. I am very excited to welcome EVP and founder of the Silicon Valley Bank's wine division, Rob McMillan. Rob is one of the top wine business analysts in the United States and the author of the Silicon Valley Bank's highly regarded annual State of the Wine Industry report, described by the New York Times as probably the most influential analysis of its kind. Rob's work in data goes leaps and bounds to help motivate our decision-making here at the studio, and I'm so excited to have him on the show today. Welcome to VINTed, Rob. Rob, I'm so excited to have you on the show. Welcome to VINTed.
Thanks a lot. I'm just really excited to be here.
Yeah, before we started recording, I was telling you about how, as Vint Studio has grown in the wine industry, your reports have been so influential in helping me both, buff up on my acumen involving the industry and specifics and all the demographics. And so I was so excited to have you today to share even more of your message to a broader audience. So thank you so much for joining today. And thank you for putting together all of the hard work you put into the report every year. It's just really, really impactful and so incredibly helpful.
Yeah, it's a labor of love for sure. It's, we give it away for free. So it better be, it's not making money from that standpoint. That's not what it's really for. It really is to help the industry and give back.
Yeah, I love that. So I want to dig in a little bit into your history. I kept thinking of the Talking Heads song. How did I get here? Like, how did you get here? What moved you from, I know you said it's like 50% of your time investment now for your job, but like, how did you go from being a banker to really the industry's go-to resource for data and analysis?
Well, if you go back far enough, I tell people that I'm ill-suited as a banker because all of my training and skills were really in arts. I was a trained percussionist, but when I graduated from college, it was a difficult time, and I just couldn't figure out how I was going to really make money. The whole thing of making money in with music is a crapshoot, total crapshoot. So I got one job offer. It was banking. And so that's what I am.
Wow.
I guess I'm also persistent and stuck with it.
Oh, but, I didn't get one job offer and I got mad and started my own business.
Yeah. Well,
20 years
works.
ago. So
yeah, that works.
Identify.
But the rest of the story is my role at Silicon Valley Bank, at being creative, which is weird for a banker. Normally anyways, I started developing businesses that were verticals so that the industry could go ahead or the bank could go ahead and focus in those special silos. And wine was the second one that I started. And then eventually, after somebody else was running it, the bank insisted that I move and up to Napa and run it. That wasn't my idea.
Yeah.
But I went ahead and I was fine with just starting businesses. And so the wine was the second.
Wow. Yeah. Twist my arm. Sorry. For those of you who don't often listen to the podcast, I record right next to the train here in Chicago. So you might get some occasional train noise. I love that. And, twist my arm, make me move to Napa. That sounds like a really hard move. I'm so sorry to hear.
Well, at the time I was in my late 30s and I just looked at it as retirement, moving out of Silicon Valley where all the action was. So I saw it as income loss. I saw it as going out to pasture. It's the last thing I wanted to do. Till our CEO came to me and he said, all right, what's it going to cost me? I said, well, that's a different question now, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
So and they did pay me.
20 years later, you feel a little differently about that decision, I guess.
Yeah, it worked out.
Yeah.
It was a great place to raise kids. I'm probably too much of a workaholic in the first place, and so being able to move back to an area, the Napa Valley, which is it's less impactful on your life versus running around in traffic in Silicon Valley. It was probably better for my mental health too.
Got it. Got it. Well, I absolutely adore Napa and the whole valley, so I'm very envious. So let's dig into the report a little bit. Selfishly, one of the things that I love most about the SVP report is that beyond being a numbers nerd, which I totally am, my husband's a clinical psychologist and he was just talking stats yesterday at
Cool.
dinner. But it's that year after year, it really, honestly, it supports my personal take that the industry needs to change and connect with younger demographics in order to thrive. So I'd love to dig a little bit more into that today and talk about, some of your understandings and knowledge that you've gained over the last years about how the industry can really begin to pivot. Can you talk a little bit more about connecting with younger audiences and more diverse audiences?
Yeah, if you want to go back, let's call it 7 or 8 years ago, there was a group that came out with a startling headline that was released in New York that millennials represented 50% of consumption in the wine industry. And I just didn't believe it. And anybody that I talked to didn't believe it. And so I started, trying to dig in and research and, how true is this? And it was really difficult to find good generational data. But I was able to after a period of time, and then ran our own surveys, and they said what I thought, which was the boomers were the dominant cohort. Which at the time we did that was fine. It didn't matter that the millennials weren't yet engaged. Everybody thought, they'll come around,
Yeah.
just like the boomers did. And in the last 5 years, I've been raising the alarm that, hey, guess what? It's not happening,
Yeah.
and it's acute now, and incredibly obvious what's happening. And yet, our industry is so happy, and we prefer to, look at things in with the glasses 3/4 full. Um, uh, or pardon me, it's not it's not 3/4 empty; it's a quarter full.
Yeah.
It's the way we like to think. Sometimes I'm viewed as a doom and gloomer, and yet if we go back 12 years ago, I can show you where I wrote a report that said it's the best of all worlds. It's a field of dreams. Next year is going to be fabulous.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just say what I think.
Yeah. And I think, especially watching how the millennial, uh, and again, there's no like the millennial, there's
Yeah.
many subsets of millennials. I know a lot of people like to think of millennials as all people under 40. But, there really is a lot of trends in what millennials gravitate towards. And, one of the things I loved about this year's report is one of the broader takeaways, really in layman's terms, is it really pays to be woke. You note that instead of bragging about the price of the bottle, younger consumers would rather have a cocktail and talk to friends about the good work that the brand that they are drinking is doing and who those owners are to make the world and what they're doing to make the world a better place. Um, and I think that's something that, I personally align with. I'm right in the cusp between Gen X and millennial. But I do see so often that, brands outside the wine industry are really taking a stake in terms of all the values that many millennials are aligning with. But the wine world just doesn't tend to get there fully. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah. I mean, the reason that they don't get there fully is simply because what's happened so far is working. And now the large wine companies have been seeing the volume side of things drop for some time. I mean, you can go back to the 60s and you can see jug wine, 1 gallon bottles like my dad used to buy.
The
And he
Rossies.
kept it, yeah, he kept it in perfect storage conditions next to the garbage disposal under the sink. And it would sit there for a week or 2 weeks,
My father drinks Boone's Farm cut with grape juice. So
Yeah, yeah. Well,
I'll
it's
raise you.
the whole generation was ethanol per dollar, is the way they thought about it. Yeah, because the quality of uh, alcohol overall in the United States back in the 60s was just not very good. Beer honestly sucked,
Yeah.
and it had consolidated, and wine was just jug production outside of imports from Europe, and spirits were. Um, I mean, there was no premium. So That's where it was back then. But since then, that segment has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk in the price point. So now we're all the way up to instead of $2, we're up to $11. And actually, if you want to look at it, $15 per bottle is starting to suffer a little bit. So, the high production side of things, I mean, they have a lot to lose. They have, investments in buildings and vineyards, and so that they got to figure out that part. In the meantime, we have the high value or luxury premium side,
Mm-hmm.
and everything's working because it's always been the boomers and it's always worked. So back to your question, is a long answer. Your question is, why change when it works? And so that's why it really hasn't changed.
Got it. And the premium segment really did see some growth this year, right? More, highest since was it 2007?
Huge.
It was like 23% increase.
Yeah, and it wasn't because last year's sales volume was low. Actually, on a volume standpoint, it kind of was zero. Let's call it that. Actually, I take it back. On a dollar standpoint, it was about zero. So it wasn't like you're going from a minus 15 to a positive 21. It's not that kind of a comp. It's zero and blasting to 21, which I knew it was going to go up, but I didn't have any clue that it was going to go up to 21% growth. That's huge.
Yeah.
While the under 11 is lost 10%.
Wow. And you think
that is volume, by the way. That's 10% by volume. That's a lot.
Yeah. Huge. And you think that is because they're kind of sticking with those boomer age groups, not necessarily because they're marketing in a different way?
Yeah, it's. I don't think the industry as a whole, whether you're big or small, has done a good job of recognizing the consumer value. I mean, it's important, I think, to market to in any business and any kind of a product. You got to market to your customers that do like your product. The last thing you want to do is run from them and try to go to do something new and then lose what you had and at the expense of maybe something that you might get. So you have to do both. You have to market to your existing customers and the new ones that are coming in. And it starts with consumer values, and the boomer values are incredibly different from younger people. I use millennial a lot, but yeah. The work that I've done more lately shows that it's the 65-year-old and above that are really dominating wine right now. And so anything under 64 and lower, that's that's where we should be marketing. And yeah. But the younger person, the millennial, is a huge generation at this point, the largest generation. So and 35 to 55 is the dominant years of consumer spending. So yeah. We ought to be looking at that group, and we ought to be figuring out what's important to them, and we ought to be. It's funny because we're plant-based, yeah. and that's a big thing now. It's as a plant-based, and just as example, there was the Wine Market Council did a survey, consumer survey, and they asked what's healthier, White Claw or wine. And it was interesting results. Older consumers felt that wine was better and it was more healthy. And they were relying on the Mediterranean diet, Arthur Kanslow's work in that spanned from the 60s through the 2000s on the J-shaped curve, and the French paradox, and where we all knew that red wine was good for your heart. And so that's what we relied on. But the young consumers, by a marginal amount, thought that White Claw was better for them. Yeah. And why? And I'm not suggesting that wineries should market this way, but they've trademarked pure or made pure, something like that. I actually looked at the trademark last week. Yeah. And it says made pure, I think is what it says. They trademarked that. And then if you go on the back, it says it's 100 calories. And they talk about gluten-free and all terms that are related to health anyways. And so the spirits industry has at least identified a part of the needs of that consumer and are hitting it full force, while the wine industry is just going about our merry way.
Yeah. And I think, it's a lot of it is about changing perspective. Like you said, with millennials thinking White Claw with all of its, I assume it's all fake ingredients, right? Flavor infusions of whatever variety. With all respect to White Claw, I haven't actually done some research on it, but I think helping people shift that perception, both with what it's made of, but also like what I think a lot of people talk about like biodynamic farming or being sustainable in like the production of wine and being healthy for you. And I think we could be going so much further in messaging that in the bottle. And there's a lot of better for you products coming out as well. Was there any data on how they're performing in terms of this new wave of reduced sugar wines or lower calorie wines, et cetera?
Well, the if you want to call them natural wines, with no real good definition, by the way.
Yeah.
Depending upon where you look, that's got very high growth rate, but it's coming off of a very low base as well. Mm-hmm. And so you are, when you talk about, well, let's look at Whole Foods, organic, right? And so if people want to go to organic, well, organic wines, by definition, that are missing those sulfites have a hard time, being saved for years if you're trying to save them up. So, producing wine without sulfites has been problematic, and yet sulfites are native in grapes anyway. So you're going to get some level of sulfites. They're just not added sulfites. But yeah, to your point, when you look at the wine industry, the vast majority, especially the premium side, it's sustainable farming. It's I screw this word up, glycophosphate or something like that. What's that word? It's Roundup, but
yeah, I know what you mean. Low intervention or
and biodynamic farming. Bringing in bees and butterflies and things like that. And the belief is by those growers that that's the right way to do it, because it produces better wine. It's not necessarily, for any other reason.
Yeah.
For example, I was at Harlan Estate, which many of your listeners would probably know has been one of my customers since before they were a company. And I didn't know until maybe 5 years ago that they've been farming biodynamic all along.
Yeah.
But they don't say it on the bottle. That's really interesting. Now they don't need to. It's a very popular brand, and they've done it in a different way, and good for them. It's really, I'm really proud of what they've done. Just and watched, it's been amazing. But the industry as a whole, that's got all the sustainable, biodynamic, and the way that they farm, that doesn't get it doesn't get brought up to the marketing. It's not just the bottle; it's the marketing that surrounds it. It's packaging. It's everything else that surrounds it. People think sometimes, well, I can't say organic on the bottle because of the bad reputation that it had. And I'm okay. Well, don't say that, but change your marketing to identify with sustainable, green, healthy things that this young consumer really does want. You're already doing it, so why don't you market it that way?
Yeah, and I know too, a lot of wineries are coming out with lower sugar, lower calorie, better for you wines, which is such a challenge because it often isn't very good. It's a sacrifice. It's like skinny girl margaritas. No one wants a skinny girl margarita because it doesn't taste great, in my opinion. Don't sue me, skinny girl. But I really do think that there are ways to talk about both sustainability, how healthy a product is for you, the health benefits. And I'd like to see the Wine Marketing Council do more as a one front where we talk about like how do we define what is healthier? How do we define what is greener, more sustainable? How do we encourage consumers to not be so concerned about alternate packaging, which is a huge part? Like 67% of the carbon footprint in wine is in supply chain, delivering it, bottles, et cetera. So like
it's
how do
heavy.
we shift consumer perception in all of those areas? But so I think it goes both ways. I think part of it is educating consumers and managing the message of how we talk about these very specific ways and kind of coming up with trademark phrases, like what's our version of it's pure or made pure. And then also, making sure that consumers understand that something like a more sustainable package doesn't necessarily affect the taste of wine. It just had, I said Marianne Leitner from Archer Roos, who's a canned wine company, on the last episode. And she was talking about how she'll go to conferences and people are like, but is wine in a can good? Does it taste good? And she's like, raise your hand if you drink beer. Like, have you ever had a beer in your life out of a can? Yes. Okay. Yeah, it's fine. Same thing. Of course, you're not going to age wine in a can, but I think there's just a
No.
lot of opportunity to build that user perception as well, and kind of move in those places.
Yeah, and one of the places we're not doing another place we're not doing well is a lot of these natural wines are made pure, whatever, however they want to frame them up. It's a net sum zero game, because what they're saying is our wine is better for you than their wine,
Yeah.
versus wine is better for you as a category,
Yeah.
which I believe, honestly. It is plant based to the extent that in the premium sector, you know where it comes from. It's farm to table.
Yeah.
And if you know that it doesn't have Roundup in it, and other things that you don't like, chemicals, that could appeal to somebody. And wine is also very expensive. It's about twice as expensive as beer, and I think it's 1.7 times. 1.3 times, I think, more expensive than spirits. So you have to overcome that higher price issue. And so I believe the way you do that is by improving the value, better explain how your product lines up to the values and the things that your consumers really do want, and these younger consumers. I think it's pretty obvious at this point what they want and how to go about it. And now, I probably should say that I don't think your listeners generally know this, but if you're a producer of alcoholic goods, and you have to have a permit in the United States, and you'll lose your permit if you claim that alcohol has health benefits. So you just can't say that, because and that falls back to selling snake oil, long time ago in Prohibition. But you just can't say that. So if you're going to go about that, you have to talk about sustainability and all these other things that I just spoke of. So you can't say no, it's good for you.
Yeah.
And better for you is on the line.
Yeah. I think that's, certainly a difficult way of just talking about it. And risking all those legalities is something we tiptoe around a lot in that messaging as well. Let's talk a little bit more about how I love how you talked about how the luxury good industry has like cracked the nut and like how it's not that millennials don't want to invest in really high quality products. It's that we're not meeting them where they are. You said that 20% of millennials consume wine, but 33% consume luxury goods. And I love, like, you think of like in fashion, what's happened in terms of embracing, tons of diversity, embracing street culture, embracing lots of different spokespeople and many different demographics. I would love to see more of that. I think of like Philippe Andre from Charles Heidsieck and how he's like really bringing this like fun, passionate, playful culture to sparkling wines from France. Any thoughts on any of that?
Well, yeah, we got to break the ghosts. That's what it really, we can't have these ghosts trailing us. Look at internet sales. And this is what COVID did. It just blasted internet sales, and the luxury industry, very much like the premium wine industry, had kind of a lockdown view of the internet, and that was, look, you really can't experience luxury unless you come into our stores and feel our fabrics and smell our leather, and come in, get a flute of sparkling wine or champagne or whatever, and visit with our people. And what the industry now has realized with COVID is that actually maybe not all of that is true, that some people prefer to shop on a phone, and they're comfortable with it. And so they will go and look. So now it ends up being, how are you going to invest in the digital experience? Because I don't care what it is. When you're talking about luxury or premium, it's experience has got to be involved. And so the young consumer, interestingly, when the term that's used in right now is experiential luxury. So when you say, what is it that the young consumer wants, the luxury industry, they're starting to say, well, it's things like, high-end hotels, resorts, cruises, restaurants, obviously too, and to some extent you could throw tasting rooms into that. But it's those experience relative then instead of things. Now, that's not to say they don't like things too, but they all have iPhones
Yeah.
and Apple Watches. So they'll spend on things that they value. But unlike my generation that wore the labels on the outside, to show them that everybody we're doing great. Look at the shirt that we can afford. That's not generally considered cool. And the young, it's kind of an anathema, to that you start thinking about social justice and people of wealth actually, they don't have a great reputation anymore.
Yeah.
You somehow, whether you have wealth, whether you got it, by natural ways or not, somehow it's ill-gotten, and so it doesn't really do anybody good to focus on that lifestyles of the rich and famous, which is my generation. You have to go in a different path.
Yeah, opulence doesn't sell the way it used to. I think it's much
doesn't.
more about aligning yourself with partnerships and cultural partnerships. I really feel like there's so many different opportunities for people to branch out. I love that you mentioned social justice. And it's not about,
Yep.
Before you go to a tasting room, and it was really about the idea of like being served and feeling special, or you go to a great dinner and someone makes you feel very important. And younger generations care more about whether or not they can get a great photo for Instagram. You think of like
That's
Raymond
true.
Vineyard and all of the picture frames. And there's so many different places where I do think that Boise has been able to make these tasting room experiences that are very Instagrammable, to not lean into that too hard. But I think it really is about shared experiences, memories, collecting that memory as opposed to collecting that one $300 bottle that you're going to save for your wedding or show off on your social media that you were opening as rare wine.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. And one of the interesting things about luxury right now is that the older consumers aren't really collecting things either anymore.
yeah.
They're getting rid of things. So that's one area where the older generation and younger generation actually do line up.
Yeah.
You wouldn't naturally think that, but they do. So that's maybe one spot that you focus on, which is experiential luxury.
Yeah. Well, in our work, we're always constantly focusing on storytelling.
Yeah.
Our motto is rich storytelling, smart design. And that really talks about, what younger demographics are looking for. It's that authenticity. It's that founder story. It's sharing your values and building a culture, understanding, how your consumers meet you or how you meet your consumers where they are and telling a story that connects them in a really authentic way. A lot of our clients are very, what I like to call owner occupied. And so we're working with clients where, the owner is touching the brand, living the brand, present in the brand. And that authenticity is something that's so attractive to younger demographics, especially when it's the right fit. And I think that's one way that wine audit or wineries can definitely begin to connect with younger demographics.
If we can get by the buzzwords.
Yeah.
Because it's like define authenticity, right?
Yeah.
And then authenticity means what I want my brand to be. And if you're not, that's not authentic. And I think consumers today see right through that. So you can't just go out and that is back up one step. There was an article in the New York Times this week. I was going to say Isaac Asimov. That was actually his dad. He was a writer, but Eric Asimov is a wine critic for the New York Times. He wrote an article, about this, this report, and I forgot where I was going with it. we'll have to authenticity.
Yeah.
That's where I was headed at. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
That happens now. So, Eric's point of view was, look, you just can't market in an inauthentic way because consumers do see through it, and there's no question in my mind that consumers are smart enough, and the information you can get on your phone now is it's insane. If you're just in a restaurant and you look at the prices in a restaurant as an example, you go on Vivino, you look at the price, it's you say, no, I don't want that. I'm not going to pay 4x markup for this bottle. It's but authenticity in the wine business, if you look at some of the major brands that are out there, like Carlo Rossi, there was a Carlo Rossi at one point, but he's been gone a very long time. So if you have a brand like that and you start talking about your attachment to the soil and your farming, but you really don't do that. And I'm not just picking on Carlo Rossi. I'm just saying if you have a brand like that, then you really have to think about what are the things that you're doing to move into those areas of values that the consumer likes, and then you can come forward with the marketing and the product, the packaging, the storytelling. It all has to line up.
Agreed. And I think it doesn't hurt to have a little bit of a fanciful story sometimes. Depending, of course, on where you are in the spectrum of price point for wines. You think of like 19 Crimes, and it's all about the Australian diaspora criminals. You're like, that's not about what's in the bottle or farming or terroirs, sustainability or any of those things. But it's a wildly successful brand because it leans into being a bad boy, being irreverent. It's fun, and it just stands out from other, what I consider kind of grocery brands. Whereas, a higher price point bottle, or it can really allow you to play both on your own personal message and what's authentic about your brand, but that can be your values. It doesn't have to just be the same story of where it's grown, how it was made, the quality of what's in the bottle. And that's all very, very important. But I think the industry as a whole can begin to storytell in a more creative way that still falls in line with their values as a brand. So don't be afraid to build that broader story and not just lean into, we're a family-owned vineyard, we're an estate winery. There's just a lot of similarities happening, especially in each AVA. I think each AVA kind of has some kind of cult narratives that happen over and over and over again. And it makes it really hard for someone, in New York City to differentiate your product from every other product in the same AVA, beyond price point, beyond like how fancy the label looks. So I just always encourage people to not be afraid to break out of the convention of what's happening in design aesthetics and brand storytelling and messaging, and lean into that own, distinctive storytelling. I think that's a huge opportunity as well.
And I think we have to be aware that, time is different than it was, say, 30 years ago. The way people, handle time, it's, things are in sound bites now. They're not in paragraphs.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was on stage a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic, I asked, the crowd, how many of you actually read the back of labels routinely? Yeah. And there's almost none in a wine crowd. And the reason is because they know what it's going to say. It's going to say, yeah, it's, we are organically, sustainably farmed, whatever, some feet, XYZ pH, harvested on yada, 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 only 6 bottles made or whatever. It's all going to be, that same thing. But, we're not even going down the path of, the use of iconography of images that tell the story of what you're trying to, because people can see those images, and you can tell a story really fast in images and get the attention of that consumer. But they're not going to read what you put on the back. And we spend all this time trying to figure out what we're going to say about the wine, and nobody reads it.
Yeah. Well, I think it depends. Like if your wine label is incredibly Spartan and there's nothing on the front, like an Orange Swift or something, like Tank Garage, where it's like just graphical, you are really going to get someone to pick up that bottle and read the back label. At that point, you can add that storytelling and dig into it. But I agree. And it's challenging though, as a designer. I think of icons as very lowbrow. You don't really ever see a circle with a line through it and think, oh, it's so expensive.
Yeah.
But there are storytelling devices that you can use. And a lot of our brand strategy gets into, how you come to those decisions. I always say that people read design in the blink of an eye, and we speak design. Everyone reads it, but our studio speaks design. And we work through our entire brand process to get to like, what is your North Star, which is that core emotion for your brand? What is the one thing you want people to feel when they connect with your brand? So for example, Walt Disney's North Star is magic. There's nothing that you see for Disney, no matter what they're selling you, if it's a cruise or a backpack, there's a sense of magic. There is a little twinkle in the air. But what is that for your brand? And then we think through the core tenets. So the 4 core differentiating points about your brand, the hows and whys of your brand. And once we have those 5 points in your brand strategy, then my design team says, oh yeah, we can say that through blink of an eye. If it's organic, that's part of the story. If it's, really about irreverence, that's part of the story. But when you start to combine the full strategy, you can't help but stand out from your competition, and you can't help but convey those really most important talking points through the design. There's always one lever we can pull as a design team to convey those things, maybe not with just an icon, but through the label itself. Is it, a natural looking paper? Is it a craft texture? Does it look healthy, does it look fresh? Like there's just so many different ways we can play, puppeteer with people's
Yeah.
emotional heartstrings and intellectual heartstrings through that design.
Yeah. Well, look, you just said Disney. And so you brought up, an iconic developer of brands.
Mhm.
And this is another one of those areas that we're not very good at, is that look at, Disney when they develop their brand, it's in toys, it's in films, it's in the parks, it's on, beverage cups,
Yeah.
it's everywhere. And the wine industry, we have several ways. The wine industry could be in the bottle, it could be in the tasting room. You could have videos on your website. Videos are, I encourage the use of videos because it's a different web search
Yeah.
than other web searches, and they do have a tendency to attract people. But it's aligning each of those marketing channels so that you're giving a consistent message.
Yeah.
It's got to be consistent.
And that's why our brand strategy work is so foundational for our clients, because it becomes this litmus test and this literal compass for every decision down the road, whether it's your social media intern or your packaging designer or your web developer. They're all looking through the same lens and able to really bring that focus and clarity to what your decision making is. I think it's a wonderful way to connect with broader audiences and be more intentional with your design. Not just following in the footsteps of what's happened traditionally in your style of wine or in your AVA, but making sure that you're able to stand out appropriately and on brand in a really authentic way.
Absolutely, yeah. Well
Yeah.
said.
So what are your goals for future reports for SVB's annual report? Anything changing in the next coming years?
Well, top level, I handle it the same way. My goal is to produce, use the term authentic. It's as best as I can figure out what's really happening in the industry. And by the way, this is a very complex industry. It took me, I'm back up one step to tell a story, but
Yeah, please.
I came up from Silicon Valley, and one of the reasons I really didn't want to go, because Silicon Valley had so many challenging things to work on mentally. It's you could, and going to Napa Valley just when I was in my late 30s just seemed, like I said, it was like retirement. So it's like, so boring. It's like, what are we going to do with all of this? But I discovered that actually wine is incredibly complex. It took me a full decade to get the instinct that I needed to be able to write these kind of reports.
Yeah.
And so every year when I do these reports, I unbundle the industry. I deconstruct it and then reconstruct it. Get all the information I can, which is really hard to find. Create information that I need as well, and I'm always surprised by what I find. So when you write a report like that, that's right. That's the goal. Is you're researching first, and you're letting the data tell you,
Yeah.
rather than having the goal of trying to promote the wine industry as an example. That's not the goal. The goal is to tell people where the industry is. It's be a guiding star, whether they want to hear the bad news part of it or not. It's not always bad. There's some good things as well, and I try to bring those out too. But I learn something every single year when I pull this industry apart, and it's really good. If I didn't do this once a year, I really would. I would just keep going on what I knew, and I would be. I just wouldn't. I wouldn't have a grasp of the way the industry changes underneath, and so that's my goal, is to provide that for whether it's academia, international imports, the wine community, retailers, and by the way, this report does go out all over the world. It's translated into Spanish, not by us, but others, and used in universities all over the world, and governments even. So it's that's the goal, is to give a fair rendering of the industry.
Love it. Well, I know, just really thank you on everyone's behalf for all of the fantastic insights and keeping that fresh and allowing people to see over time, even how things have evolved and changed. I love that you always recap what happened in the previous years, what you were wrong about, what you were right about. It's truly really, really helpful. And in terms of the complexity of the industry, I feel like even from a design perspective, thinking like, well, I understand, TTP regulations and printing and all those good things. And then the more you get into the wine industry, there's just endless amounts of opportunities to learn more and more and more. I remember when I first got started, even understanding that a bottling, a facing, and a label all mean the same thing. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, you mean a label? Got it. Sure. So I agree with you. There's just endless amounts of interest. And really, that's why I started this podcast, to be able to connect with more people in the industry, to share some of the insights as I dig more into, all that data and information and growth of the industry with people like my listeners. So I'm so grateful for you for joining me today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I've enjoyed the conversation. I hope your listeners didn't get bored and listened all the way through.
I'm sure they did. So Rob, where can people find more about you?
Well, you can find online. I work for Silicon Valley Bank, and so it's www.svb, stands for Silicon Valley Bank.com. And then if you want to see the wine report, it's svb.com/wine-report. And you can see the video cast. You can download the data that's there. And then also you can see my blog, which is SVB on Wine. If you Google that, you'll find it. And then join the site, and you can see my occasional, middle of the year ponderings, because things change through the year, and every now and then I think I need to talk about that. Right now, I'm about ready to update the financial side of things, which is the industry is all private, but I get all their financial statements. So it's a little bit hard. You can't fool me, right? But the industry needs those benchmarks. So I haven't produced them for a couple of years because we had bigger fish to fry as an industry, as a people, really. Yeah. But now that we're kind of moving through Omicron, I'm going to post these probably in the next week, and so people want to see how much wine industry really make, how much a winery really makes. Look at SVB on Wine, my blog.
Awesome. Everyone go check out Rob's blog. I can't wait to go read it myself. All right. Thank you so much for being on the show today. And thank you for listening to VINTed, everyone. I will see you on the next episode. Cheers. Tune in for the next VINTed. Subscribe today. For future episodes, marketing advice, and more, follow me on Instagram @Scout Driscoll. Learn more about VINT's design and branding services for wineries at www.vint.studio.